The humid air of Coruripe hung heavy over the sugarcane fields of Brazil's northeast coast in September 2025. It was a quiet afternoon in this sleepy coastal town, the kind of place where the rhythm of life is dictated by the harvest and the tides. But that silence was shattered by a jarring mechanical roar, followed by the sickening crunch of metal striking earth. To the locals who rushed toward the rising column of smoke, it initially appeared to be a heartbreaking aviation mishap, perhaps a tourist who had misjudged the terrain, or a local flyer who had encountered mechanical trouble. However, when investigators navigated through the tall stalks of cane to reach the impact site, the narrative shifted instantly from a tragic accident to an international crime scene. What they found, scattered across the scorched earth, defied immediate explanation. Amidst the twisted aluminum and shattered avionics lay hundreds of tightly wrapped, rectangular packages. They were uniform, heavy, and oddly branded. Stamped on the front of each brick was the distinct SpaceX logo, the emblem of Elon Musk's aerospace giant. But these packages contained no rocket components or satellite technology. Inside the wrapping was 200 kilograms of high-grade cocaine. The branding was a surreal touch, a hallmark of the cartel's dark sense of humor, or perhaps a marker of high-flying quality. Yet the strangeness of the scene did not end with the illicit cargo. Inside the cockpit of the crumpled single-engine aircraft, authorities discovered the remains of the pilot. Identification found on the scene named him as Timothy James Clark, a 46-year-old national from Melbourne, Australia. He was the sole occupant, a man thousands of miles from home, appearing to be just another casualty of the perilous drug trade. But as investigators sifted through the debris surrounding the pilot's seat, they found items that painted a confusingly domestic picture. Resting near the millions of dollars in narcotics were tearing sachets of Vegemite, crushed tins of Milo, and fragments of Tim Tam wrappers. These mundane, nostalgic snacks offered an eerie, humanizing counterpoint to the criminal magnitude of the wreckage. They were the comforts of an Australian expat, remnants of a man who packed a lunchbox for a flight that would ultimately end his life. The juxtaposition was jarring. A multi-million-dollar payload stamped with the logo of a space pioneer, piloted by a man, fueled by the simple tastes of suburban Melbourne. At first glance, the crash seemed like the conclusion of a simple, albeit high-stakes, smuggling run gone wrong. But as Brazilian authorities secured the perimeter and began to piece together the flight path, they realized this was no ordinary courier job. The sheer quantity of the drugs, combined with the specific modifications of the aircraft, hinted at a logistical operation of staggering complexity. This wasn't just a pilot who got lost. This was a window into a secret life that spanned 3 continents. The man known as Timothy Clark was not merely a victim of a fatal crash. He was the linchpin in a narrative involving staggering sums of money, a hidden identity, and a reckless game of chance played in the skies above the Atlantic Ocean. The sugarcane fields of Brazil held the final chapter of his story, but to understand how a friendly Aussie ended up there, we have to look back to where the deception began. To understand the magnitude of what happened in that Brazilian field, we must shift our focus across the ocean, to the dusty airfields surrounding Johannesburg, South Africa. Here, the man found in the wreckage was known simply as Tim. To the local aviation community, he was the definition of a carefree, enthusiast, a friendly, scruffy Australian, often seen wandering the hangars in worn denim. His hair unkempt, always ready with a smile. Mechanics and fellow pilots described him as down-to-earth, the kind of guy who would happily spend hours helping you tinker with your engine before even looking at his own. He was a fixture in this world, radiating an aura of harmless passion for flight. But this easygoing exterior was a carefully constructed mask, hiding a reality far more perilous than anyone sharing a coffee with him could have imagined. The centerpiece of Clark's deception was his aircraft, a Sling 4. Under normal circumstances, this South African-manufactured kit plane is a reliable, 4-seat vehicle designed for recreational hopping between cities or scenic coastal flights. It is not, by any stretch of the imagination, built for intercontinental travel. However, investigations by media outlets and open-source intelligence groups revealed that Clark had radically re-engineered the machine. He had stripped out 3 of the 4 seats, turning the passenger cabin into a massive, flying fuel reservoir. By installing long-range tanks where his friends or family should have been sitting, he transformed a light recreational plane into a dedicated transatlantic courier. The risks involved in operating such a vessel were astronomical. The Sling 4 runs on a single-piston engine. In the world of aviation, reliability is everything. But over the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, a single engine offers zero redundancy. If a cylinder misfired or a fuel line clogged thousands of miles from the coast, there would be no emergency landing, no radioing for help, and certainly no rescue. It would simply be a silent glide into the dark water. Yet, intelligence suggests Clark didn't just attempt this terrifying journey once. He reportedly completed the crossing as many as 30 times. These were not short hops. Each leg of the journey required upwards of 40 hours of continuous flight time. Imagine sitting in a cramped cockpit, surrounded by the fumes of aviation fuel and the smell of raw narcotics, fighting exhaustion for nearly 2 full days while the ocean churned endlessly below. It was a route known as a ghost run. Clark would depart from remote, clandestine strips in South America, flying perilously low to evade radar detection, skimming the waves to stay invisible to international monitoring systems. His destination was rarely a major airport. Instead, he targeted isolated airstrips along Africa's west coast, often facilities managed by private mining companies, operating far outside the purview of strict government oversight. From these desolate landing zones in places like Namibia and Mozambique, the payload would be offloaded and dissolved into distribution networks stretching toward Europe, and eventually his home country of Australia. He had effectively become a one-man logistics airline for the underworld, earning an estimated $22 million for his willingness to gamble his life against the mechanics of a plastic plane. But while he played the role of the rugged soloist in the sky, he was secretly tethered to one of the most powerful criminal syndicates on Earth. While the image of a solitary pilot battling the elements is compelling, the investigation into Timothy Clark's activities unveiled a far more intricate reality. He was not merely a freelancer seeking adventure. Evidence suggests he was a crucial node in a global web of organized crime. Reports from investigative bodies, including Bellingcat, indicate that Clark was operating within the sphere of the Kinahan syndicate, a sophisticated organization with roots in Ireland and tentacles reaching across Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. Known for their logistical mastery, the syndicate treats narcotics trafficking with the precision of a multinational shipping corporation, and Clark's specific skill set moving product across the Atlantic gap was a vital asset in their supply chain. The connection was not speculative. It was rooted in digital footprints that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. Clark was directly linked to a South African-based associate, currently facing severe charges in Western Australia for similar aviation-based importation schemes. The relationship went beyond professional courtesy. In 2018, Clark posted a restaurant review online that included a photograph of himself and this associate dining together in Harare, Zimbabwe. It was a candid moment frozen in time, 2 men enjoying a meal, seemingly relaxed, while allegedly orchestrating one of the most daring logistics operations in the Southern Hemisphere. This single image dismantled the lone wolf theory, placing Clark firmly within a network that moved commodities from Brazilian production zones to the lucrative markets of Australia and Europe. Yet, it is in the psychological profile of the man that the story takes its most bizarre turn. In his daily life at the airfields near Johannesburg, Clark was a master of blending in. He drove inconspicuous cars, wore unassuming clothing, and lived with a modesty that deflected suspicion. To his peers, he was just a guy scraping by to keep his plane in the air. But in the digital realm, a completely different persona emerged that was desperate to scream about his success. On platforms like TripAdvisor, Clark shed his humble disguise and adopted the voice of a high-rolling connoisseur. He left meticulous, detailed reviews of luxury experiences that most people only dream of. He bragged openly about spending €5,500 on drinks in a single evening at a VIP bar in Saint-Tropez. He heaped praise on the staff of an exclusive catamaran charter in Bali and critiqued high-end safari lodges in Zimbabwe, locations that intelligence agencies have since flagged as meeting points for syndicate figures. This digital behavior reveals a fascinating and tragic dissonance. Here was a man earning millions through high-stakes illegality, yet he could not spend the money openly in his community without raising red flags. His wealth became a burden he could only unload in secret or to an audience of strangers on the internet. The reviews were his release valve, a way to validate his ego and prove to himself that he was a player in a world of luxury, even if he had to return to the dusty airfield and pretend to be a darn penniless mechanic the next day. It was a dangerous game of psychological brinkmanship, leaving breadcrumbs of his true movements for anyone with the patience to connect the dots. While he projected the image of a wealthy tourist online, he was simultaneously managing a complex corporate shell game back home, designed to wash the very funds he was so eager to boast about. Beneath the veneer of the scruffy mechanic and the digital bravado of the high-flying tourist lay a cold, calculated infrastructure of finance designed to sanitize the proceeds of his dangerous trade. Clark was not stuffing cash into mattresses. He was reportedly orchestrating a sophisticated shell game involving legitimate markets. Corporate records indicate he was listed as a director or secretary for a dizzying array of entities across Australia and Africa, with names like Stock Assist Group, Gurney Capital Nominees and Tic-Tac-Toe Pty Limited. To the casual observer, these appeared to be standard holding companies, but investigators believe they functioned as the financial engine room for laundering millions. The strategy was intricate. Some of these companies held substantial shares in Australian mining firms, such as Victory Mines and Classic Minerals. By engaging in large underwriting deals through entities like Stock Assist Group, Clark could theoretically integrate his illicit earnings into the regulated financial system, turning the profits of transatlantic smuggling into clean, tradable assets. It was a dual existence of staggering contrast. By day, he was a key figure in the dry world of mineral exploration and corporate governance. By night, he was modifying aircraft to haul narcotics across the ocean. His second aircraft, a Beechcraft King Air 350, was reportedly used for legitimate travel, a perfect cover to mask his movements between continents and maintain the illusion of a respectable businessman. However, in the final months leading up to September 2025, the precarious balance of Clark's double life began to wobble. Sources suggest his movements became increasingly erratic, perhaps driven by the pressure of the syndicate or the addictive rush of the flights themselves. He was preparing for another long-haul mission, what many believe was the first leg of a massive trafficking operation, when fate finally intervened. The Sling 4 that took off from the Brazilian interior was pushed far beyond its safe operational limits. The aircraft was groaning under the immense weight of the auxiliary fuel tanks required for the crossing, combined with the 200-kilogram payload of cocaine. It was a flying fuel bomb, stripped of safety features and loaded with contraband. Whether it was a catastrophic mechanical failure in the single-piston engine, the onset of pilot fatigue after years of grueling runs, or an evasive maneuver gone wrong, the specific cause of the crash remains a subject of speculation. What is certain is that the journey ended not on a remote African airstrip, but in the unforgiving earth of a sugarcane field. The explosion that followed silenced the engine forever, leaving only smoke and scattered debris to tell the tale. For weeks, Timothy Clark remained a John Doe in a Brazilian morgue. His family in Melbourne was entirely unaware of the tragedy, until reporters from the Daily Mail contacted his father to break the news. It was a devastating revelation. They had known a son who loved aviation and lived abroad, not a man entangled in international organized crime. His remains were eventually repatriated, leaving his family to grapple with a legacy that is equal parts heartbreaking and baffling. Timothy James Clark represents a new archetype in the underworld, the independent contractor, educated, skilled, and willing to operate outside the traditional hierarchy of gangs. He was a broker who bet everything on his ability to navigate the gray zones of the sky. In the end, he died as he lived alone, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the illusion of freedom. His story serves as a chilling reminder that the modern face of trafficking isn't always a hardened criminal on a street corner. Sometimes, it is a solitary figure at 10,000 feet, gambling their existence on a single engine and a payload of white powder.